Rejected Horse Rises Again, Part 1. The grand auction hall buzzed with murmurs as spotlights swept across the glossy floor. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the well-dressed crowd ranchers in pressed shirts, wealthy horse owners in tailored suits, and serious buyers clutching catalogs in manicured hands. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our final offering of the evening. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall, but something in his tone changed to slight hesitation that quieted the crowd. The side door opened and a collective gasp rippled through the room. In the harsh spotlight stood a chestnut stallion, its coat dull and marred with scars. The animal's head hung low, its once proud stance now broken. The handler tugged at the lead rope, but the horse moved with painful reluctance, each step a testament to past suffering. "This 7-year-old stallion comes without papers," the auctioneer announced. "We'll start the bidding at $500. Silence fell over the room. The stallion stood motionless in the center of the display ring, its eyes vacant as if already resigned to whatever fate awaited. "Do I hear 500? The auctioneer tried again. 400. Laughter rippled through the crowd. A woman in a designer dress whispered loudly, "What's the point? That horse isn't worth a dime." 300, 200. The auctioneer's voice grew desperate. In the back of the auction hall, a chair scraped against the floor. Jack Cooper stood up in his simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, his face tanned from outdoor work. "I'll take him," Jack said, his voice steady, though not loud. "Sir, did you make an offer?" Jack nodded. "I said I'll take him." A moment of stunned silence followed, then scattered laughter. "Are you serious, son?" An older man in an expensive suit turned to look at Jack. "That nag isn't worth the trailer ride home?" Jack kept his eyes fixed on the horse. "What's your asking price?" $200 to start. 200, Jack confirmed. The auctioneer looked around the room. "I have 200. Do I hear 250? No one moved. The crowd watched with a mixture of amusement and disbelief as the gavel came down. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $200. After completing the paperwork, Jack approached the horse. The handler thrust the lead rope into Jack's hands and walked away without a word. Jack slowly crouched down to meet the stallion's gaze. The horse flinched but didn't turn away. Its eyes, though dull, showed a flicker of curiosity at this human who wasn't shouting or yanking at the rope. "Hey there," Jack whispered. "I'm Jack. I know you've had it rough, but that's over now. I promise." To everyone's surprise, the horse's ears twitched forward slightly. For the first time that night, it lifted its head and regarded Jack with what almost looked like interest. "What does he think he's doing?" someone murmured as Jack continued to speak softly to the animal. Jack loosened the too tight halter that had been cutting into the horse's face. "Let's get you out of here," he said, leading the stallion slowly toward the exit. As they stepped outside, the cool Kentucky night air swept over them. Jack paused, giving the animal a moment to breathe before guiding him to the trailer. "I'm calling you Maverick," Jack said, "because that's what you'll be again, a free spirit." The Cooper family farm sat nestled in the rolling hills of central Kentucky, a modest operation compared to the sprawling thoroughbred establishments that dominated the region. The white farmhouse overlooked 30 acres of pasture land divided by wooden fencing. A red barn stood nearby, flanked by a small riding arena and several paddocks. Dawn had barely broken when Jack's truck pulled up the gravel driveway, the trailer rattling behind. Robert Cooper, Jack's father, stepped outside, coffee mug in hand. "That the horse?" he called as Jack parked. Jack nodded. "His name's Maverick." Robert approached the trailer and peered through the slats, his weathered face, lined from decades of outdoor work, creased with concern. "Good Lord, son, what happened to him?" "Don't know the whole story yet," Jack replied, unlatching the trailer. "But I'm going to find out." In the early morning light, Maverick's condition appeared even worse, ribs protruding through his dull coat, old scars crisscrossing his flanks, and fresh abrasions where ill-fitting tack had rubbed his skin raw. "Your mother's not going to like this," Robert said quietly. The screen door opened as Sarah Cooper stepped onto the porch, tying a robe around her waist. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled into a hasty ponytail. Jack, is that— She stopped, hand flying to her mouth. Oh my heavens. Sarah hurried down the steps, medical instincts overriding her shock. A retired nurse, she approached, slowly assessing the horse with professional detachment. How much did you pay for him? She asked. 200? She circled Maverick carefully. Might have been 190 too much. Mom. I'm just saying what anyone with eyes would say. She softened, touching her son's arm. But I know why you did it. Jack led Maverick toward the barn, his parents following at a respectful distance. Inside, he had prepared a large stall with fresh bedding water and hay. Maverick hesitated at the entrance, his ears flicking nervously. It's okay, Jack soothed. This is home now. Slowly, the stallion stepped inside. Rather than exploring, he moved directly to the far corner and stood facing the wall, his body rigid with tension. He's terrified, Sarah observed. Jack nodded, his throat tight. I know. You've got your work cut out for you, Robert said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. But if anyone can reach him, it's you. Sarah studied her son's face. What made you choose this one, Jack? There must have been healthier horses at that auction. Jack watched Maverick standing motionless in the corner. There was something in his eyes, behind all that fear. There's still something fighting to survive. So, after his parents left, Jack pulled up a stool just outside Maverick's stall. He didn't try to approach the horse, respecting the animal's need for space. Instead, he simply sat, occasionally speaking in low, gentle tones about nothing in particular, the weather, the farm, his plans for the day. Maverick remained in his corner, but Jack noticed his ears occasionally flicking backward, listening. That night, Jack brought a sleeping bag to the barn and made himself comfortable on a pile of hay bales near Maverick's stall. He pulled out a well-worn copy of The Black Stallion and began to read aloud, his voice a gentle murmur in the darkness. Sometime during the night, Jack dozed off. He awoke at dawn to find Maverick had moved from his corner. The horse now stood facing the stall door, watching Jack with cautious interest. Good morning, Jack said softly. Sleep well. Maverick's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice. It was progress, small but real. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Jack spent every moment he could in the barn, talking quietly, reading, or simply sitting in companionable silence. Maverick continued to refuse grain from the feed bucket. On the 4th morning, Jack entered the stall for the first time, moving slowly and keeping his voice low and steady. Maverick retreated to his corner, eyes wide with alarm. It's just me, Jack said, remaining near the door. I'm not going to hurt you. He sat cross-legged on the straw, placed an apple slice on his open palm, and extended his hand partway toward the horse. Then he waited, patient and still. An hour passed. Jack's arm grew tired, but he didn't waver. Finally, he began to sing softly, an old folk song his grandfather had taught him about a wild Mustang running free across the plains. Whether it was the melody or simply the hours of persistent gentleness, something shifted in Maverick's demeanor. Tentatively, the horse took one step forward, then another. Maverick stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he caught the sweet scent of apple. With sudden decisiveness, the stallion snatched the apple slice from Jack's palm and retreated quickly to his corner, chewing rapidly. Jack smiled but didn't celebrate aloud, afraid to break the moment. Instead, he placed another slice on his palm and waited. This time, Maverick approached more quickly, though still wary. By the 5th slice, he was standing close enough that Jack could feel his warm breath. That's it, Jack whispered. Nothing to fear here. That night, for the first time since arriving at the Cooper farm, Maverick emptied his feed bucket. Jack sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and printouts, a half-empty coffee mug at his elbow. Outside, rain drummed against the windows. He'd been up for hours, researching everything he could find about horses with trauma rehabilitation techniques and psychological recovery in abused animals. Sarah placed a plate of eggs and toast beside him. You need to eat too, she said, glancing at his notes. Find anything useful? Jack rubbed his eyes. Some. There's a technique called pressure and release that might help Maverick understand that people can be predictable. Sarah sat across from him. Jack, honey, I know this means a lot to you, but I'm worried. About Maverick. About you. She reached across to close one of the books. I've seen you like this before, throwing yourself completely into something, not sleeping, barely eating. Jack looked up ready to defend himself, but the concern in his mother's eyes stopped him. I'm fine, Mom. It's different this time. Is it? She asked gently. After what happened with Gallant Spirit, you swore you'd never get involved with horses again. Now suddenly you're back in it, and with a horse in worse shape than... Maverick isn't Gallant Spirit, Jack interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. He took a breath, moderating his tone. I'm not trying to train him for competition. I just want to give him a chance at a decent life. Sarah squeezed his hand. I know your heart's in the right place. Just don't lose yourself in this, okay? After breakfast, he drove into town to visit Hartman's Feed and Tack. The familiar sense of leather grain and sweet feed enveloped him. Jack Cooper, as I live and breathe, called Ed Hartman from behind the counter. Haven't seen you in here for ages. Hey, Ed, need to pick up a few things. Heard you got yourself a project horse, Ed said, leaning on the counter. Word travels fast. Jack smiled tightly. News to me that my business is so interesting. When the former rising star of Kentucky horse training suddenly buys the sorriest-looking nag at Westfield auction, people talk. Ed's eyes held a mixture of curiosity and concern. They're saying the horse is untrainable, that it's dangerous. They're wrong, Jack said simply. He's just been through hell. As Ed gathered the items, the door chimed. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a Stetson hat entered, followed by two younger men in similar Western attire. Jack recognized him immediately. Mike Dawson, one of the most successful trainers in the county. Cooper, Dawson acknowledged with a curt nod. Heard you were back in the game. Just helping out a horse in need, Mike. Nothing competitive. Dawson gave a skeptical chuckle. That's so. Because I saw that wreck of a horse you bought. Looks more like a glue factory candidate than a rescue project. The two younger men snickered. Jack felt heat rising in his face, but kept his voice level. Every horse deserves a chance. Noble sentiment, Dawson replied, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but. But some horses are just born bad, or broken beyond repair. You used to know that. Jack gathered his purchases. Thanks, Ed. Put it on my account. Running away from good advice, Cooper, Dawson called. Just like you ran from Harlan's stable when things got tough. Jack paused, a rush of old memories threatening to surface. He took a deep breath, then pushed through the door without looking back. Dr. Sarah Wilson's truck was parked near the barn when Jack returned home. Inside, he found his father standing with the veterinarian beside Maverick's stall. Jack, his father called. I know you wanted to wait, but I was worried. He still hasn't touched his morning feed. He ate last night, Jack protested, then turned to Dr. Wilson. He took apple slices from my hand yesterday. Dr. Wilson offered a small smile. That's a good sign, but your father was right to call me. She gestured toward Maverick. I've just done a preliminary examination. He's severely malnourished and those wounds need treatment. Jack set down his purchases. How bad? I've seen worse, she admitted, but not often. He's about 200 pounds underweight. The scars on his flanks are old, but there are newer abrasions that are at risk of infection. His hooves show signs of neglect, and there may be some tendon damage in his left front leg. Can he recover? Jack asked, the question catching in his throat. Dr. Wilson's expression softened. Physically, with proper care and time, yes. But mentally, that's harder to predict. Horses don't forget trauma easily. Jack moved closer to the stall. Maverick's eyes followed him, alert but guarded. I need to come back tomorrow with my equipment to do a proper workup, Dr. Wilson continued. But for now, I've left some antibiotic ointment for those open wounds and a vitamin supplement to add to his feed if you can get him to eat it. He'll eat, Jack said with quiet confidence. We made progress yesterday. That evening, Jack sat in Maverick's stall, reading aloud from a dog-eared Western novel. The horse had eaten a small amount of grain mixed with the vitamin supplement, and now stood more relaxed than Jack had yet seen him, occasionally nickering softly at the sound of Jack's voice. "You know what I think?" Jack said, setting the book aside. "I think someone made you believe you were worthless, that you didn't deserve kindness." He stood slowly moving to Maverick's side. The horse tensed, but didn't retreat. They were wrong. Carefully, Jack extended his hand, letting Maverick catch his scent. Then, with gentle movements, he ran his palm along the stallion's neck. Maverick trembled, but allowed the touch. "That's it," Jack murmured. "Nothing to fear." Later that night, unable to sleep, Jack sat at his desk in his childhood bedroom. Trophies from riding competitions lined the shelves, and framed photographs of a younger Jack atop various horses decorated the walls. His eyes lingered on one photo in particular, himself, at 23, smiling proudly beside a magnificent black thoroughbred. Gallant spirit. The memory of what happened to that horse still haunted him. The pressure from the owners to push for one more race, despite the trainer's concerns. The catastrophic breakdown on the backstretch. The sound of a gunshot that ended a champion's suffering. Jack had walked away from professional training that day, vowing never to be part of that world again. Now, 5 years later, here he was once again pouring his heart into saving a broken horse. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I won't fail you," he whispered to the darkness, "not like I failed him." The Westfield Auction House office was a small, cluttered space attached to the main auction hall. File cabinets lined the walls, and the air smelled of coffee and old paper. Behind a desk piled high with folders sat Marvin Green, the auction manager, a stout man in his 60s, with thinning hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers. He barely looked up when Jack entered. "Help you?" "I'm Jack Cooper. I purchased a chestnut stallion at your auction last Friday night." Marvin glanced up, recognition dawning. "The rescue case, lot 157. That's the one. I was hoping to get some information about where he came from." Marvin leaned back in his chair. "Most folks who buy horses here don't come back asking questions, especially about the cheap ones." "I'm not most folks," Jack said evenly. "The horse has been badly mistreated. I'm trying to understand what happened to him." Marvin studied Jack for a moment, then sighed. "Wait here." He heaved himself from his chair and disappeared into a back room. Minutes later, he returned with a thin manila folder. "This is all I've got on that horse," he said, dropping the folder on the desk. "Don't expect much." Jack opened the file. Inside was a basic intake form. Chestnut stallion, estimated 7 years, no papers, consigned by Richard Thornton, River Bend Farm. "Thornton," Jack read aloud. "Do you know him?" Marvin snorted. "Everyone around here knows Rich Thornton. Owns that big endurance racing operation out past Millerville. Got a reputation for producing winners, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "But what?" Jack pressed. "Let's just say he's not known for his gentle methods." Marvin tapped the folder. "If that horse came from Thornton's farm looking like he did, I'm not surprised." The drive to River Bend Farm took Jack through some of Kentucky's most beautiful countryside rolling hills, covered with bluegrass white fences enclosing manicured pastures and stately barns that resembled southern mansions. River Bend Farm, when Jack finally located it, stood in stark contrast to its neighbors. The entrance was marked by a weathered sign hanging crookedly from a single chain. The once white fences had faded to gray and sagged in places. He parked near the house, a substantial 2-story structure that had clearly seen better days. As Jack stepped out of his truck, a man emerged from the barn, watching his approach with undisguised suspicion. He was tall and lean, perhaps 60, with a deeply lined face and cold gray eyes. "You're trespassing," the man called as Jack approached. "This is private property." "Mr. Thornton?" Jack asked, stopping at a respectful distance. "Who's asking?" "My name's Jack Cooper. I bought a horse at Westfield Auction last week." "A chestnut stallion that came from your farm." Thornton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or wariness. "Lot of horses go through that auction," he said dismissively. "Can't be expected to remember everyone." Jack held Thornton's gaze. This one would be hard to forget, scarred all over, half-starved, terrified of human contact. A muscle twitched in Thornton's jaw. "If you came here to accuse me of something, you can turn right around and leave." "I didn't come to accuse," Jack said, though it took effort to keep his voice level. "I came for information. That horse has been through hell, and I'm trying to help him recover." Thornton studied Jack for a long moment, then gave a curt nod toward a pair of weathered chairs on the porch. "5 minutes," he said. "Then you're gone." From the porch, Jack could see more of the property, a training ring with hard-packed dirt, several small paddocks containing thin-looking horses, and an endurance course winding into the hills beyond. "The stallion," Thornton finally said, "was supposed to be my next champion. Had all the making, speed, stamina, heart. I paid good money for him as a 3-year-old. "What happened?" Jack prompted. Thornton's mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a sneer. "He wasn't tough enough. Endurance racing isn't for the faint-hearted horse or rider. You need grit, determination, the will to push through pain. And if they don't have enough grit, then they don't make it in this sport," Thornton said flatly. "I don't waste resources on failures." "What happened specifically? Was there an incident?" Thornton's weathered face hardened. "Last year's Blue Ridge 100. Toughest endurance race in 3 states, 100 miles of mountain terrain in less than 24 hours. He was leading at the 80-mile checkpoint. A hint of pride crept into his voice. But then he started favoring that left front leg. Nothing serious, just needed to push through it. "You continued the race with an injured horse," Jack said, the statement hanging between them like an accusation. Thornton's eyes flashed. "Champions don't quit when things get tough. I've finished races with worse injuries myself." But he didn't finish. "No," Thornton admitted. "Collapsed at mile 92. Pathetic display. Wouldn't get up no matter what we tried." He looked away. After that, he was useless. Wouldn't approach the trailer, spooked at the starting bell, trembled at the sight of a saddle. Jack could picture it all too clearly. Maverick pushed beyond endurance, then punished for his resulting fear. "Why didn't you put him down?" Jack asked. "If he was useless to you, why send him to auction in that state?" Thornton didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note Jack hadn't heard before, something almost like uncertainty. "Thought maybe someone would see something in him I didn't," he muttered. "Guess that someone was you." He stood abruptly. "Your 5 minutes are up." Jack remained seated. "One more question. Did he have a name before the auction?" Thornton hesitated. "Resilient Spirit," he said finally. "Ironic, isn't it?" As Jack drove away from Riverbend Farm, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, emotions warred within him, rage at Thornton's callousness, grief for what Maverick had endured, and a deepened resolve to help the stallion recover. It was nearly sunset when Jack returned to the Cooper farm. The golden light of early evening bathed the fields in a warm glow, so different from the stark, neglected atmosphere of River Bend. Jack headed straight for the barn, needing to see Maverick to reassure himself that the horse was safe now. He found Maverick standing quietly in his stall, looking more relaxed than Jack had yet seen him. The stallion nickered softly at Jack's approach, a sound of recognition that made Jack's heart swell. "Hey, buddy," Jack said, opening the stall door. "I learned a lot about you today." He entered slowly and stood beside Maverick, gently stroking his neck. "Your name was Resilient Spirit," he told the horse. "But I think Maverick suits you better. A maverick is someone who refuses to play by rules that hurt him. That's what you did, wasn't it? You refused to break yourself for him." Maverick leaned slightly into Jack's touch, his breath warm and soft. "I promise you," Jack whispered, "you'll never have to run until you break again. Not ever." As if understanding, Maverick turned his head and gently nudged Jack's shoulder the first time he'd initiated contact. Jack blinked back, unexpected tears, overwhelmed by the simple gesture of trust. Rejected Horse rises again. Part 2. The morning sun filtered through the barn windows, casting golden squares of light across the straw-covered floor. Jack arrived early, a steaming travel mug of coffee in one hand and a small canvas bag in the other. He paused at Maverick's stall, smiling at the sight that greeted him. The chestnut stallion stood at the front of his stall, ears pricked forward in greeting. In just 2 weeks, the difference in the horse was remarkable. Though still underweight, Maverick's coat had begun to regain its natural shine, and the wounds on his flanks were healing cleanly. More significantly, the fear in his eyes had diminished, replaced by a cautious trust that warmed Jack's heart. "Morning, buddy," Jack said, setting down his coffee. "Ready for something new today?" From the canvas bag, he withdrew a soft brush and a hoof pick. Maverick had grown comfortable with basic grooming, but they hadn't yet progressed to handling his feet, a significant step for a horse with fear issues. Jack entered the stall, slowly speaking in the calm, steady voice that Maverick had come to recognize. He began with the familiar routine of brushing starting at the neck and working his way along the horse's body. Maverick leaned into the strokes, his eyes half closing in contentment. "That's it," Jack murmured, "just like always." When he reached Maverick's left front leg, the one that had given out during that fateful race, Jack paused. This was the moment of truth. Asking a horse to lift its foot required trust. The animal had to balance on 3 legs, making itself vulnerable. "Easy now," Jack said, running his hand down Maverick's foreleg. The horse tensed, but didn't pull away. Gently, Jack applied slight pressure behind the fetlock, the universal signal for a horse to lift its hoof. For a moment, Maverick froze, his entire body rigid. Jack waited patiently, maintaining the gentle pressure but not increasing it. Then, with a soft exhale, Maverick shifted his weight and lifted his foot an inch off the ground. "Good boy," Jack praised quickly, supporting the hoof before Maverick could change his mind. He worked efficiently with the hoof pick, cleaning out the packed dirt and checking for any signs of injury or disease. The hoof was in better shape than he'd expected, though it needed trimming, a task for another day. After repeating the process with the other 3 hooves, Jack stepped back and regarded Maverick with undisguised pride. "You did it, bud. First time perfect." Maverick nickered softly, bumping his nose against Jack's chest in what had become their ritual greeting. Jack chuckled, stroking the horse's forehead. "Got big plans for you today," he said. "Dr. Wilson thinks you're ready for some real exercise. What do you say we try the paddock?" At the sound of the barn door opening, both Jack and Maverick turned. Frank Reynolds stood in the doorway, his weathered frame silhouetted against the morning light. He wore faded jeans and a worn plaid shirt, a battered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. "Morning," Frank called, his voice gravelly but friendly. "Hope I'm not interrupting?" Jack had called Frank the previous evening after much deliberation. His instincts told him the older trainer genuinely wanted to help, and Jack couldn't deny that Frank's knowledge of Maverick's history could prove invaluable. "Right on time," Jack replied, stepping out of the stall. "We were just finishing up." Frank approached slowly, his experienced eye taking in Maverick's improved condition. "He looks better," he said, genuine approval in his tone. "You've done good work with him." Maverick watched Frank warily, ears flicking back and forth, but he didn't retreat to his corner, another sign of progress. "He remembers me," Frank observed. "But he's not panicking. That's promising." Jack nodded. "I was thinking of taking him to the paddock today. Let him stretch his legs a bit." Frank considered this. "Good idea, but let's keep it simple. Just lead him around at first. Let him get comfortable with the space. No pressure, no expectations." Together, they attached a lead rope to Maverick's halter. Jack led while Frank followed at a respectful distance. As they stepped out of the barn into the sunlit yard, Maverick hesitated, blinking in the brightness. His nostrils flared, drinking in the scents of grass hay and open air. "Give him a moment," Frank advised, when Jack made to encourage Maverick forward. "Let him take it in on his terms." Jack nodded, relaxing the tension on the lead rope. After a few seconds, Maverick stepped forward, willingly following Jack across the yard to the small paddock adjacent to the barn. Once inside the enclosure, Jack unclipped the lead rope, allowing Maverick freedom within the fenced area. The stallion stood motionless for a long moment, as if unsure what was expected of him. "He's forgotten what it's like to just be a horse," Frank said quietly. At Thornton's place, every minute outside a stall meant work, usually painful work. Jack's jaw tightened at the thought, but he kept his voice calm for Maverick's sake. Not anymore. This is just for him. Gradually, Maverick began to explore the paddock, moving in an ever-widening circle. His steps were tentative at first, then more confident. When he reached a patch of lush grass, he lowered his head and began to graze, an ordinary action for a horse, but one that brought a smile to both men's faces. "Look at that," Jack said softly. "A normal horse doing normal horse things." Frank nodded, leaning against the fence. "It's the small victories that matter most in rehabilitation. Every natural behavior he reclaims is a step away from his trauma." As Maverick continued to graze, occasionally lifting his head to survey his surroundings, Jack turned to Frank. "Tell me about him," he said. "About who he was before." Frank's weathered face softened with memory. "He came to River Bend as a 3-year-old with the best natural endurance aptitude I'd seen in 20 years. Not the fastest horse on the short track, but he had this efficiency of movement, like he could go all day without tiring." "How did Thornton get him?" "Bought him from a breeder in Montana who specializes in distance horses. Paid $30,000 for him, which was a bargain even then." Frank shook his head. "First year was good. We trained him right, gradual conditioning, proper nutrition, plenty of rest between workouts. He took to the training like he was born for it." "What changed?" Jack asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Frank's expression darkened. "Thornton got greedy. Started entering him in bigger races before he was ready. When he placed second in the Tennessee Ridge Classic, Thornton took it as a personal insult. That's when the pushing started." He paused, his gaze fixed on Maverick. "I should have quit then. Knew what was coming. But I told myself I could protect him, moderate Thornton's demands." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Fooled myself." Jack recognized the self-recrimination in Frank's voice. He'd carried a similar burden since Gallant Spirit's breakdown. "You can't blame yourself for Thornton's actions." "Can I?" Frank countered. "I was the head trainer. I knew what was happening was wrong, but I kept quiet, kept cashing those paychecks." He straightened his shoulders with visible effort. "But that's why I'm here. Can't change the past, but maybe I can help give him a future." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Both men turned to see Maverick breaking into a cautious trot along the fence line. His movement was stiff, lacking the fluid grace of a healthy horse, but the joy in the simple act of running was unmistakable. "Would you look at that?" Frank said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "There's still some spirit left in him after all." "There's more than some," Jack replied confidently. "It's just been buried under pain and fear." They watched in companionable silence as Maverick completed a circuit of the paddock, then gradually slowed to a walk, sides heaving slightly from the unaccustomed exercise. "He'll need careful conditioning to rebuild his strength," Frank noted. "Those muscles have atrophied and that left foreleg needs special attention." Jack nodded in agreement. "Dr. Wilson said the same thing. She's coming by tomorrow to do another checkup and help us develop a rehabilitation plan." At the mention of the veterinarian, Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sarah Wilson heard she's the best large animal vet in the county." "She's been a godsend," Jack confirmed. "Came out the day after I brought Maverick home and has been checking on him regularly since." "Smart move getting her involved early," Frank said approvingly. "Too many trainers try to handle rehabilitation without proper veterinary guidance." As they continued their discussion of Maverick's physical needs, the barn door opened and Sarah Cooper emerged with a tray holding a pitcher of iced tea and 3 glasses. "Thought you boys might be thirsty," she called, approaching the paddock fence. Jack introduced his mother to Frank, explaining the older man's connection to Maverick. Sarah's initial wariness, evident in her slightly narrowed eyes, softened as Frank respectfully outlined his knowledge of equine rehabilitation and his desire to help undo some of the damage Thornton had caused. "Well, any help is welcome," Sarah said, finally pouring tea into the glasses. "That horse has stolen my son's heart, and I'd like to see him healthy and happy." Frank accepted the offered glass with a nod of thanks. "Ma'am, if I know anything about horses, and I've been working with them for 45 years, that one's worth the effort. Your son saw something the rest of us missed, and I'm starting to think he was right." As they sipped their tea, Maverick approached the fence, curious about the gathering. He stretched his neck over the top rail, nostrils flaring as he investigated Frank's scent. After a moment's consideration, he extended his muzzle toward the older man's shoulder, not quite touching, but offering the possibility of contact. Frank remained perfectly still, allowing Maverick to make the choice. When the horse finally nudged his arm gently, a look of profound emotion crossed Frank's weathered face. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "Didn't expect that." "He's a good judge of character," Sarah observed with the hint of a smile. Later that afternoon, after Frank had departed with plans to return the following day, Jack received an unexpected visitor. Mike Dawson's gleaming black pickup truck pulled into the driveway, dust billowing behind it. Jack was in the barn preparing Maverick's evening feed when he heard the truck door slam. Setting down the feed scoop, he stepped outside, curiosity and wariness mingling in equal measure. Dawson approached with his characteristic swagger, expensive boots kicking up little puffs of dust from the dry earth. His customary Stetson hat shaded his face, but Jack could see the smirk playing around his lips. "Cooper," Dawson greeted him. "Thought I'd stop by and see this miracle horse of yours." "What can I help you with, Mike?" Jack asked evenly, not bothering to hide his suspicion. Dawson chuckled. "Just curious, that's all." "Word's getting around that you've got old Frank Reynolds helping you with Thornton's reject. Strange bedfellows, don't you think?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "Frank knows Maverick. His help is valuable." "Maverick," Dawson repeated, amusement coloring his tone. "Cute name for a broken-down nag." "Did you come here just to insult my horse, or was there something else?" Jack asked, his patience wearing thin. Dawson's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Actually, I came with information I thought you might find interesting." He glanced toward the barn. "Thornton's been asking around about you. And about his horse." This caught Jack's attention. Why would he care? He threw Maverick away. "That's the funny thing about Richard Thornton," Dawson said, leaning against the fence post. "He doesn't like losing things on anyone's terms but his own. Word is he's annoyed that the horse he discarded is showing signs of recovery." A calculated pause. "And he's particularly interested in Frank's involvement." Jack processed this information, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Are you saying Thornton might try to interfere?" Dawson shrugged. "I'm just passing along what I heard. Thornton's got a reputation for holding grudges, especially against former employees who cross him." His gaze sharpened. "And Frank Reynolds didn't just quit. He left with some choice words about Thornton's training methods. Very public, very embarrassing." "Why tell me this?" Jack asked, genuinely confused by Dawson's apparent act of goodwill. Dawson straightened, adjusting his hat. "Believe it or not, Cooper, I respect what you're doing. Don't think it'll work, but I respect the attempt." A thin smile crossed his face. "Besides, Thornton's no friend of mine. He poached 3 of my clients last year with promises of faster results." As Dawson turned to leave, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Just watch your back. And tell Frank to watch his." After Dawson's departure, Jack returned to the barn, his mind churning with this new information. Maverick greeted him with a soft nicker, blissfully unaware of the potential complications brewing. "Don't worry," Jack told the horse, stroking his neck. "Nobody's going to hurt you again." Later that evening, after Maverick had been fed and settled for the night, Jack sat on the porch steps of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and amber. The screen door creaked behind him as Emma, his younger sister, emerged with 2 bottles of beer. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him one before settling beside him on the step. "Mom said you had an interesting day." Jack took a grateful sip. "You could say that." Emma nudged his shoulder. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Jack filled her in on Frank's visit, Maverick's progress, and Dawson's unexpected warning. Emma listened attentively, her brow furrowing as he described Thornton's apparent interest. "Do you think he'd really try to take Maverick back?" she asked when he'd finished. Jack shook his head. "Legally he can't. I have the bill of sale, but he could make things difficult in other ways. Like pressuring Frank to back off, or spreading rumors about the horse being dangerous to devalue him." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Not that I'm planning to sell Maverick, but Thornton has connections in the horse world that could impact his future. Emma was silent for a moment, contemplating the purpling twilight sky. You know, she said finally, in all the time since Gallant Spirit, I've never seen you like this. Like what? Jack asked. Passionate, engaged, like you found your purpose again? She turned to look at him directly. It's good to see even with the complications. Jack hadn't thought of it that way. The past weeks had been so focused on Maverick's needs that he'd barely considered how the experience was affecting him. But Emma was right. For the first time in 5 years, the hollow feeling in his chest had begun to fill with something that felt remarkably like hope. It's different this time, he said slowly. With Gallant Spirit, everything was about performance, about winning. With Maverick, he searched for the words, it's about healing, both of us, I think. Emma smiled, clinking her bottle against his. To second chances, then. To second chances, Jack echoed the simple toast, carrying more weight than either of them acknowledged. The following morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect Kentucky spring day. Dr. Sarah Wilson arrived early, her truck loaded with equipment for Maverick's comprehensive examination. Jack and Frank were waiting for her in the paddock where Maverick had spent the night at Frank's suggestion. Horses are herd animals, Frank had explained. They feel safer in open spaces where they can see potential threats. A stall can feel like a trap to a traumatized horse. The strategy had paid off. Maverick looked more relaxed than ever, grazing contentedly in the morning sun. Dr. Wilson greeted them warmly, her practical demeanor softened by genuine enthusiasm when she saw Maverick's improved condition. Well, now this is progress, she said, setting down her medical kit. He's put on weight, and that coat is starting to shine. Jack couldn't help but smile at the praise. He spent his first night outside yesterday. Frank thought it might help him feel more secure. Dr. Wilson glanced at Frank with newfound respect. Good call. Environmental enrichment is as important as physical care in these cases. For the next hour, the three of them worked together to examine Maverick thoroughly. The horse remained surprisingly cooperative, flinching only when Dr. Wilson palpated his left front leg. There's definitely some soft tissue damage here, she said, gently manipulating the leg. Old injury that never healed properly. But the good news is, it's not irreparable. What's the treatment plan? Jack asked. Dr. Wilson straightened, pulling off her examination gloves. Controlled exercise to rebuild muscle, daily joint supplements, and hydrotherapy if possible. Cold hosing that leg after any workout will help reduce inflammation. Frank nodded in agreement. The creek on the north pasture would work for some water walking once he's ready. Natural footing, gentle current, not too deep. Perfect, Dr. Wilson said. I'd also recommend massage therapy for those contracted muscles in his back and shoulders. The tension he's carrying is partly psychological, but there's a physical component too. Jack made mental notes of each recommendation, determined to implement every suggestion. Anything else? Dr. Wilson hesitated, glancing between Jack and Frank. There is one more thing, but it's a bit unorthodox. She patted Maverick's neck. I've been reading some research on equine PTSD. Yes, horses can develop something very similar. One approach that's showing promise is sensory reintroduction. Meaning, Jack prompted. Meaning carefully reintroducing the stimuli that trigger fear responses, but in a safe, controlled environment. She looked to Frank. You mentioned he panics at the sound of starting bells, the feel of certain tack. Frank nodded grimly. Among other things. Instead of avoiding those triggers forever, we gradually desensitize him to them. It's similar to exposure therapy in humans with anxiety disorders. Jack considered this. Sounds risky. It is, Dr. Wilson acknowledged. But without addressing those specific fears, he'll never fully recover. He'll just learn to function around them. Frank had been listening intently, his weathered face thoughtful. The doc's right, he said finally. I've seen this approach work with other horses. It's slow, requires infinite patience, but when it works, he smiled slightly. It's like watching a prisoner walk free. The imagery resonated with Jack. That was exactly what Maverick was, a prisoner of his past trauma, confined by fear even when physical barriers were removed. Okay, Jack decided. Let's do it. Where do we start? The three of them formulated a comprehensive rehabilitation plan that combined physical therapy with gradual sensory reintroduction. They would begin with the least threatening stimuli, the soft jingling of bits and buckles, the weight of a light blanket on Maverick's back, and progress only as the horse showed readiness. After Dr. Wilson departed with promises to return the following week, Jack and Frank set to work implementing the first phase of the plan. Frank had brought along a soft leather halter, similar in style, but gentler than the racing tack Thornton had used. "We'll start with the basics," Frank explained, holding the halter where Maverick could see and smell it. "Everything associated with his training at River Bend needs to be reconditioned with positive experiences." Jack watched as Frank patiently introduced the halter, allowing Maverick to investigate it thoroughly before making any attempt to put it on him. When the horse finally accepted the halter without tension, both men exchanged satisfied smiles. "Small steps," Frank said, "but meaningful ones." As the day progressed, they worked through several more gentle exercises, each designed to build Maverick's confidence and trust. By late afternoon, the stallion was noticeably tired, but calm, a far cry from the terrified animal that had arrived at the Cooper farm. Frank was packing up his truck to leave when the sound of approaching vehicles caught their attention. Two cars were coming up the driveway. A sleek black Cadillac, followed by a battered news van with the logo of the local television station emblazoned on its side. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, moving instinctively toward the paddock where Maverick grazed. Frank's face had hardened, his eyes fixed on the Cadillac. "Thornton," he said, the single word loaded with tension. Sure enough, as the Cadillac rolled to a stop, Richard Thornton emerged from the driver's seat, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed absurdly formal for a farm visit. Behind him, two people exited the news van, a smartly dressed woman with a microphone and a man hefting a camera onto his shoulder. "Jack Cooper," the woman called, striding toward them with professional confidence. "I'm Diane Matthews from WKYT News. We're doing a story on horse rehabilitation and rescue. Mr. Thornton here tells us you've got quite the success story." Jack exchanged a bewildered glance with Frank. This was the last thing he'd expected. Thornton approached with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Cooper, Reynolds." He nodded to each of them in turn. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit. When Miss Matthews here approached me about endurance racing, I thought of your project. Thought it might make for an inspiring segment." The calculated insincerity in Thornton's voice set Jack's teeth on edge. This was clearly no act of goodwill. "Mr. Thornton mentioned he generously donated a retired racing horse to you," Diane continued, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling between the men, "and that you've been working miracles with him." "Donated," Frank repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what you're calling it now, Rich?" Thornton's smile tightened fractionally. "Figure of speech. The auction proceeds went to charity, of course." Before Frank could respond, Jack stepped forward, determined to take control of the situation. "Miss Matthews, I appreciate your interest, but we're in the middle of a sensitive rehabilitation process. Media exposure isn't appropriate at this stage." Diane's professional smile dimmed slightly. "But Mr. Thornton assured us—" "Mr. Thornton no longer has any connection to this horse," Jack interrupted firmly. "And while we'd be happy to discuss equine rehabilitation in general, this particular case isn't open for public scrutiny." The reporter looked between Jack and Thornton, sensing a more interesting story than she'd anticipated. "Perhaps you could explain the situation. Our viewers love a good controversy." Thornton's expression darkened. "There's no controversy, Miss Matthews. I simply thought—" "What you thought," Frank cut in, "was that you could disrupt this horse's recovery for your own purposes. Whatever game you're playing, Rich, it stops now." The camera operator had begun filming, capturing the escalating tension. Diane Matthews looked positively delighted by this unexpected turn of events. "Mr. Reynolds, isn't it?" she asked, turning toward Frank. "I understand you used to work for Thornton Endurance Racing." Care to comment on your departure from the organization? Frank's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, a soft, nickering sound drew everyone's attention. Maverick had approached the fence, his curiosity apparently overcoming his caution. When he caught sight of Thornton, however, his entire demeanor changed. His ears pinned back against his head, his eyes widened in unmistakable fear, and he backed away rapidly, nearly stumbling in his haste to retreat. The camera captured it. All the horse's recognition, his terror, his desperate flight to the far corner of the paddock where he stood trembling. A heavy silence fell over the group. Diane Matthews glanced from the frightened horse to Thornton, her reporter's instincts clearly sensing a much different story than the one she'd been pitched. "Your donated horse seems to have quite a strong reaction to seeing you, Mr. Thornton." She observed, her tone suddenly more investigative than friendly. Thornton's face had reddened either from embarrassment or anger. "That proves nothing. The animal was always high-strung." "High-strung," Frank repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call it when a horse is driven to physical and mental collapse?" The camera swung toward Frank, who stood his ground, years of pent-up frustration finally finding an outlet. "Maverick Resilient Spirit, as he was known then, was one of the most talented endurance horses I've ever worked with." Frank continued, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. "He didn't fail Thornton. Thornton failed him, pushing him beyond any reasonable limit and then discarding him when he broke down." Diane Matthews' eyes widened at this unexpected windfall of controversy. She turned back to Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, would you care to respond to these allegations?" Thornton's composed facade was crumbling rapidly. "Reynolds is a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. His accusations are baseless and potentially libelous. Then you deny that the horse was injured during the Blue Ridge 100 while under your ownership," Diane pressed. "Many horses sustain minor injuries during competition," Thornton replied stiffly. "It's part of the sport." Jack had heard enough. While the others argued, he had moved to Maverick's side, speaking softly to the trembling horse. Now, he returned to the group, cold determination in his eyes. "Miss Matthews, if you're interested in a story about horse rescue and rehabilitation, I'd be happy to provide you with contacts at legitimate equine rescue organizations," he said firmly. "But this impromptu confrontation ends now. You're on private property, and I'm asking you all to leave." Diane seemed torn between pursuing the unexpected controversy and respecting Jack's request. Professionalism won out, albeit reluctantly. "Of course, Mr. Cooper, we appreciate your time." She handed him a business card. "If you change your mind about sharing Maverick's story, please call me." As the news crew packed up their equipment, Thornton lingered, his cold gaze fixed on Frank. "You'll regret this, Reynolds," he said quietly, voice pitched for Frank's ears alone. "Retirement won't be peaceful for you." Frank met his former employer's stare without flinching. "Nothing you can do to me will compare to what you've already done to yourself, Rich. Now get off this property before I forget my manners entirely." After the unwelcome visitors had departed, Jack and Frank stood in silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. "Well," Jack said finally, "I guess we know why Dawson said Thornton was asking questions." Frank nodded grimly. "He was planning this ambush, probably hoped to catch the horse looking pathetic for the cameras, make himself look generous by comparison." He shook his head. "Backfired spectacularly, though." Jack wasn't so sure. "Maybe, but now he's angry. And Thornton seems like the type to hold a grudge." "Oh, he is," Frank confirmed. "Trust me on that." They turned their attention back to Maverick, who remained in the far corner of the paddock, still visibly unsettled by Thornton's appearance. "This sets us back," Jack said with a sigh. "He was doing so well." Frank considered the trembling horse thoughtfully. "Maybe not as much as you think. Yeah, he's scared, but he didn't completely fall apart. A month ago, that encounter might have triggered a dangerous panic response." He glanced at Jack. "He's stronger than he looks, like someone else I know." Jack managed a small smile at the unexpected compliment. "Let's hope so, because I have a feeling our road just got more complicated." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the paddock, Jack and Frank worked together to calm Maverick. They moved slowly around him, not approaching directly but creating a peaceful presence that gradually soothed his agitation. "Good boy," Jack murmured as Maverick finally lowered his head and blew out a long breath, a sign of relaxation in horses. "That's it." Frank watched the interaction with quiet approval. "You've got away with him," he observed. "A natural connection." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just patience, that's all." "No," Frank said, shaking his head. "It's more than that. Patience can be learned, but what you've got, that intuition, that understanding that's inborn." A wistful expression crossed his weathered face. "I've worked with horses for over 40 years, and I still can't do what you do naturally." Before Jack could formulate a response, the sound of a truck engine caught their attention. Dr. Wilson's white pickup was returning, moving quickly up the driveway. "Wasn't expecting her back today," Jack said, puzzled. Dr. Wilson parked hastily and hurried toward them, concern evident in her brisk stride. "I passed a news van on the road," she said without preamble. "What happened?" Jack gave her a condensed version of Thornton's unwelcome visit, while Frank continued to monitor Maverick. Dr. Wilson's expression darkened as she listened. "That man," she said when Jack had finished. "I've treated too many horses that came from his program. Always the same pattern of injuries, excessive strain, inadequate recovery time." "You never reported him?" Jack asked. She sighed. "Tried once early in my practice. But without concrete evidence of willful abuse, there wasn't much the authorities could do. Pushing a horse hard isn't illegal, just unethical." Her gaze shifted to Maverick. "How's he doing?" "Shaken," Jack admitted. "But coming around. Frank thinks it might not be as big a setback as I feared." Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Frank's probably right. In a way, this could be viewed as an unexpected step in the exposure therapy we discussed. Maverick saw Thornton, but in a safe environment with you present. He was scared, but survived the encounter." It was a perspective Jack hadn't considered. "So this could actually help in the long run." "Possibly," Dr. Wilson conceded. "Though I wouldn't have chosen to introduce such an intense trigger so early in the process." As they continued their discussion, Maverick cautiously approached the fence drawn by Dr. Wilson's familiar voice. When he reached them, he extended his muzzle toward Jack's pocket where an apple slice was often hidden. Jack laughed, the sound releasing some of the day's tension. Okay. I see your priorities." He produced the treat, which Maverick accepted with surprising delicacy. Dr. Wilson smiled at the exchange. "Food motivation is a good sign. Traumatized animals often lose their appetite." "He's come a long way," Frank agreed, "but we've still got a mountain to climb." They spent the next half hour discussing adjustments to Maverick's rehabilitation plan in light of the day's events. Dr. Wilson suggested incorporating more confidence-building exercises, while Frank emphasized the importance of maintaining a consistent routine to provide security. As darkness fell, Jack led Maverick back to his stall in the barn. Though the horse had been doing well in the paddock after today's stress, they all agreed the familiar enclosure might be comforting. After securing Maverick for the night with fresh water and hay, Jack walked Dr. Wilson and Frank to their vehicles. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked Frank. The older man nodded. "I'll be here. And Jack?" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'm sorry about today. Thornton coming here, that was because of me, my history with him." Jack shook his head firmly. "You don't owe me any apologies, Frank. If anything, I should thank you for standing up to him." After they'd departed, Jack returned to the barn for one final check on Maverick. The stallion was munching contentedly on his hay, seemingly recovered from the day's excitement. "Good night, buddy," Jack said softly, running a hand along the horse's neck. "Tomorrow's a new day." As Jack walked back to the house under a sky scattered with stars, he reflected on how quickly life had changed since that night at the auction. What had started as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something far more complex, a journey of healing that now faced unexpected opposition. But despite the complications, Jack felt a sense of purpose, stronger than anything he'd experienced since walking away from professional training 5 years ago. Maverick needed him, and in a way he was only beginning to understand he needed Maverick too. "We're going to make it," he murmured to the night sky. "Both of us." Rejected Horse rises again. Part 3. Dawn broke over the Cooper farm in a symphony of golds and ambers, the morning mist rising from the fields like spectral wisps. Jack stood at Maverick's stall watching the chestnut stallion devour his breakfast with healthy enthusiasm. Despite yesterday's confrontation with Thornton, Maverick seemed remarkably composed, another small victory in his ongoing recovery. "Morning, handsome," Jack said, smiling as Maverick looked up from his feed bucket. "Ready for a big day." It had been 3 weeks since Thornton's unwelcome visit, and in that time Maverick had made steady progress. The rehabilitation plan created by Dr. Wilson with Frank's expert input was showing results beyond what any of them had dared hope. The stallion's physical condition had improved dramatically. His coat now gleamed with health, his once prominent ribs were covered with muscle, and even his damaged leg showed signs of healing. More impressive still was his psychological transformation. The terrified, withdrawn horse from the auction house had given way to a curious, increasingly confident animal who greeted Jack each morning with soft nickering and eager eyes, to the soft sand footing that provided the perfect environment for their work. The morning routine began with familiar groundwork exercises, leading, stopping, and turning on command, all reinforced with gentle praise and the occasional apple slice. When Maverick was thoroughly warmed up and relaxed, Frank produced a soft fleece saddle pad from his canvas bag. It was deliberately different from the racing tack Maverick would associate with pain. This one was forest green rather than the traditional white and made of plush material that would feel gentle against his back. "Remember," Frank cautioned, "we move at his pace, not ours. If he shows signs of distress, we back off immediately." Jack nodded, taking the pad. They had prepared for this moment with weeks of desensitization, brushing Maverick's back with increasing pressure, draping light towels across his withers, and gradually introducing the scent of leather and fleece. "Hey, buddy," Jack said softly, approaching Maverick with the pad visible in his hands. "Look what I've got. Nothing scary here." Maverick eyed the saddle pad ears, flicking forward with interest rather than pinning back in fear. Jack allowed him to sniff the pad, thoroughly familiarizing himself with its scent and texture. When Maverick seemed comfortable, Jack raised the pad slowly toward his back. This was the critical moment. At Riverbend Farm, the act of saddling had often preceded painful forced exercise or harsh training methods. If any object were to trigger Maverick's trauma responses, this would be it. Maverick tensed as the pad hovered above his back, his muscles twitching beneath his gleaming coat. But he didn't shy away or panic. "Easy," Jack murmured, his voice a soothing constant. "You're safe. Always safe with me." With infinite gentleness, he lowered the pad onto Maverick's back. The horse remained still, though his rapid breathing betrayed his anxiety. Frank stood nearby, watchful but not interfering, allowing Jack and Maverick to navigate this crucial moment together. "Good boy," Jack praised, running his hand along Maverick's neck. "So brave." For several minutes they simply stood there, the pad resting lightly on Maverick's back, while Jack stroked his neck and spoke in soothing tones. Gradually, Maverick's breathing slowed, his posture relaxed, and he released a deep, shuddering breath that horsemen recognized as a sign of acceptance. Frank's weathered face broke into a smile. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Didn't think we'd get this far today." Encouraged by Maverick's calm acceptance, Jack decided to try another step. With slow, deliberate movements, he began to walk Maverick in a small circle, the pad still in place on his back. The stallion followed willingly, showing no signs of distress at the unfamiliar sensation of the pad shifting slightly with his movement. "Look at him," Jack said, unable to keep the pride from his voice, "acting like it's the most natural thing in the world." "He trusts you," Frank observed. "That's what makes the difference. He knows you won't ask anything of him that would cause harm." After a few more minutes of walking, Jack removed the pad, ending the session on a positive note. Maverick received lavish praise and a handful of small treats, reinforcing the experience as something positive rather than threatening. As they returned Maverick to his stall for a rest, Frank clapped Jack on the shoulder. "That was textbook perfect, son. Couldn't have handled it better myself." Coming from Frank with his decades of experience, the compliment meant a great deal. Jack felt a surge of satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. This wasn't just about proving his skills as a trainer. It was about keeping a promise he'd made to a broken horse on a dark auction house floor. "We've still got a long way to go," Jack reminded himself, not wanting to get overconfident. "True," Frank agreed, "but don't underestimate what you accomplished today. 3 months ago, that horse would have panicked at the mere sight of a saddle pad. Today, he wore it like a champion." They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Wilson, who had been making weekly visits to monitor Maverick's progress. She greeted them with her characteristic brisk warmth, her experienced eyes immediately noting the positive changes in Maverick's demeanor. "Someone's looking happy today," she remarked, approaching the stall where Maverick now dozed peacefully in the late morning sun. "Successful session." Jack filled her in on the morning's achievement with the saddle pad. Dr. Wilson listened attentively, nodding her approval. "That's significant progress," she confirmed. "His stress indicators are way down from when I first examined him. Heart rate, normal respiration, easy, no excessive sweating." She smiled at Jack. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." "It's a team effort," Jack replied, glancing at Frank. "Couldn't have done it without Frank's guidance." Dr. Wilson's examination confirmed what they'd observed. Maverick was thriving under their care. His weight had stabilized at a healthy level. His coat gleamed with vitality, and even his damaged leg showed remarkable improvement. "I think we can start introducing some light groundwork for that left foreleg," she suggested after completing her assessment. "Nothing strenuous, but some targeted exercises to strengthen the supporting muscles." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "The creek work we discussed might be good for that. Water provides resistance without impact." "Exactly what I was thinking, Doctor." Wilson agreed. "Start with just 5 minutes and gradually increase as he builds strength." As they continued discussing Maverick's physical rehabilitation, Emma appeared at the barn entrance waving a newspaper. Her expression was troubled, immediately putting Jack on alert. "Have you seen this?" she asked, handing him the local paper, the Millerville Chronicle. Jack unfolded the paper, Frank and Dr. Wilson moving to read over his shoulder. The headline on page 3 made his stomach clench. "Controversial horse trainer alleges animal theft and mistreatment." Beneath the headline was a photograph of Richard Thornton standing beside a gleaming trophy, looking every inch the successful horseman. The article quoted him extensively, claiming that his valuable endurance prospect had been acquired under dubious circumstances and was now being subjected to experimental rehabilitation techniques by unqualified handlers. Though the article didn't name Jack or Maverick directly, likely due to legal caution, the implications were clear to anyone familiar with the situation. That lying son of a Frank began, his face flushing with anger. "Easy," Dr. Wilson cautioned, though her own expression was grim. "This is exactly what he wants to provoke a reaction." Jack read through the article again, his initial shock giving way to cold anger. Thornton had cleverly crafted his allegations to avoid outright libel while still casting doubt on Maverick's rehabilitation. He'd even managed to imply that Frank's involvement was some kind of vendetta against his former employer rather than genuine concern for the horse's welfare. "What do we do?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed with worry. "People in town are already talking." Jack folded the newspaper deliberately, his mind working through the implications. "We stick to our plan," he said finally. "Thornton wants to derail Maverick's progress to prove he was right about him being untrainable. We're not going to let that happen." "The best response is success," Dr. Wilson agreed. "Results speak louder than allegations in a small-town newspaper." Frank had been uncharacteristically quiet, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Thornton won't stop with one article," he warned. "I know how he operates. This is just the opening move." Jack suspected Frank was right. Thornton's wounded pride wouldn't be satisfied with a single shot across the bow. But what could his endgame possibly be? He had discarded Maverick as worthless. Why this sudden interest in the horse's fate? The answer came later that afternoon when Mike Dawson's black pickup rolled up the driveway for the second time that month. The trainer's expression was serious as he approached Jack and Frank, who were preparing for Maverick's afternoon session. "Figured you'd have seen the article by now," Dawson said without preamble. "But there's more you should know." Jack gestured toward the porch. "Let's talk inside." Once seated at the kitchen table with coffee mugs in hand, Dawson revealed what he'd learned from his connections in the endurance racing community. Thornton's newest prospect, a gray gelding he was bragging about last month, broke down during training. Severe tendon injury, career ending. Dawson sipped his coffee. "He's telling sponsors it's a temporary setback, but word is he's desperate for a replacement before the Blue Ridge qualifying season starts." Frank's eyes narrowed, and suddenly he remembers Maverick exists. "Bingo," Dawson confirmed. "I've heard he's been showing that newspaper article to potential investors, claiming he's going to rescue his champion from incompetent handling and put him back on the circuit." Jack felt a chill despite the summer warmth. He can't take Maverick back. "I have legal ownership." "Legally, you're in the clear," Dawson agreed. "But Thornton has ways of making things difficult. Sponsors, venue owners, transport companies. He's got connections throughout the industry. He can't force you to sell, but he can make Maverick's future challenging if he puts his mind to it." The implications were troubling. Jack had been focused on Maverick's rehabilitation, not his long-term future in the equestrian world. But eventually, Maverick would need more than the Cooper farm could offer. Perhaps a career in a discipline better suited to his temperament, or even a role in therapeutic riding once he was fully recovered. "Why are you telling us this?" Frank asked Dawson, suspicion evident in his tone. "You and Thornton run in the same circles." Dawson's expression hardened. "We compete in the same events doesn't mean we're friends. Besides," he hesitated, an unusual display of uncertainty from the typically confident trainer. "I've been watching what you're doing with that horse. It's good work. Old-school horsemanship, the kind that's disappearing with all these quick-fix trainers." Jack studied Dawson with new interest. The man's reputation was built on winning at all costs, but perhaps there was more depth to him than Jack had given him credit for. "What would you suggest?" Jack asked. Dawson considered the question. "Document everything. Every step of Maverick's recovery, every veterinary visit, every milestone. Build a case that proves your methods are working." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "And then make it public. Not through some small-town newspaper, but through channels that matter in the equestrian world." "Like what?" Frank asked. "The American Endurance Ride Conference publishes a journal. They're always looking for rehabilitation success stories. Or the Equine Welfare Alliance, they've been pushing for reforms in endurance racing for years." Dawson shrugged. "Get your story out there first, backed by facts and professional testimony. Make it harder for Thornton to spin his version." It was surprisingly good advice from someone Jack had long considered an adversary. The strategy made sense, fighting Thornton's misinformation with documented truth rather than defensive reactions. After Dawson departed, Jack and Frank discussed the situation with Dr. Wilson, who had returned for an evening check on Maverick. She immediately offered to provide detailed medical documentation of Maverick's condition upon arrival and his subsequent improvement under their care. "I've got colleagues at the university veterinary program who might be interested in this case as well," she added. "Equine PTSD is an emerging field of study. Maverick could contribute valuable data to the research." Their impromptu strategy session was interrupted by Robert Cooper, who entered the kitchen with an expression that mixed concern and amusement. "You all might want to see this," he said, handing Jack his tablet. On the screen was a social media post that had already accumulated hundreds of comments and shares. Someone had uploaded a video clip from the day Thornton had arrived with the news crew, specifically the moment when Maverick had recognized his former owner and reacted with obvious terror. The caption read, "Horse's reaction to former owner speaks volumes. This is resilient spirit." Allegedly mistreated by prominent trainer Richard Thornton, Now being rehabilitated by Jack Cooper in Millerville. Jack scrolled through the comments, a mixture of outrage at Thornton's treatment of Maverick and support for the rehabilitation effort. The post had been shared by several equine welfare groups and was gaining traction rapidly. "Who posted this?" Jack asked, bewildered. The video had been taken by the news crew, but they had never aired the footage as far as he knew. "Check the username," Emma suggested, looking over his shoulder. The account was named truth_and_training. With no identifying information, it could be anyone who had access to the raw footage, someone at the news station perhaps, or even one of the crew members who disagreed with how their segment was being directed. "Well," Frank said with a grim smile, "looks like someone beat us to the punch on going public." "This changes things," Dr. Wilson observed. "Thornton can't simply spin his narrative now. There's visual evidence contradicting his claims." Jack wasn't entirely comfortable with this unexpected publicity. He had wanted to focus on Maverick's rehabilitation without distractions, but he couldn't deny the potential benefit of having public opinion on their side if Thornton decided to escalate his campaign against them. As evening descended over the farm, Jack returned to the barn for a final check on Maverick. The stallion greeted him with a soft nicker seemingly untouched by the human complications swirling around him. "Don't worry, boy," Jack murmured, stroking Maverick's neck. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." The following morning brought unexpected visitors to the Cooper farm. Jack was working with Maverick in the round pen, practicing the gentle desensitization exercises that had become their daily routine when a sleek silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Two women emerged, one in her 60s, elegantly dressed despite the rural setting, the other younger, perhaps in her 30s, carrying a professional camera. They approached the fence, watching Jack and Maverick with evident interest. Jack completed the exercise before acknowledging them, unwilling to interrupt Maverick's session for unexpected guests. When he finally turned toward them, the older woman smiled warmly. "Mr. Cooper, I'm Eleanor Whitfield, chairperson of the Equine Welfare Alliance. This is my colleague Jessica Chen, our media coordinator." She gestured toward Maverick, who was calmly accepting a treat from Jack's palm. "And I presume this is the famous resilient spirit, or Maverick, as I understand you've renamed him?" Jack was momentarily speechless. The Equine Welfare Alliance was one of the most respected advocacy organizations in the country, with significant influence in racing and competition circles. "Yes, ma'am," he finally managed. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor's smile widened. "Actually, it's what we might be able to do for each other, Mr. Cooper. That video of Maverick's reaction to Mr. Thornton has created quite a stir in the equestrian community. Our organization has been monitoring Richard Thornton's operation for some time, but we've never had compelling evidence to support intervention." She nodded toward Maverick. "Your work with this horse could change that." Jack led Maverick back to his stall, then joined the women on the porch where Sarah Cooper had set out iced tea and cookies. As they settled into rocking chairs, Eleanor explained their interest in more detail. "The Equine Welfare Alliance has been pushing for stricter regulations in endurance racing for years," she said, accepting a glass of tea from Sarah with a grateful nod. "The sport has grown too focused on speed and competition at the expense of horse welfare. Cases like Maverick's are unfortunately common, but rarely documented as thoroughly as yours appears to be. We're preparing a presentation for the American Endurance Ride Conference's annual meeting," Jessica added. "A case study of rehabilitation following documented abuse could be extremely powerful in arguing for rule changes." Jack considered their proposal carefully. On one hand, he had no desire to thrust Maverick into the spotlight or to become the public face of a reform movement. On the other hand, the Alliance's support could provide protection against Thornton's machinations and potentially help other horses in similar situations. "What exactly would this involve?" he asked. "Documentation primarily," Eleanor replied. "Photographs, video footage of Maverick's recovery process, veterinary reports, trainers' logs. We'd compile it into a presentation that highlights both the damage caused by extreme training methods and the potential for rehabilitation when proper techniques are applied." "We wouldn't need to identify you by name if you prefer anonymity," Jessica assured him. though having a respected trainer like yourself associated with the case would add credibility. Jack glanced toward the barn where Maverick was enjoying his midday rest. I'd need to consult with my team, Dr. Wilson and Frank Reynolds. They've been integral to Maverick's recovery. Of course, Eleanor agreed. We'd want their input as well, particularly Dr. Wilson's medical assessments. She hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know, Mr. Cooper. Richard Thornton is scheduled to speak at the conference, a presentation on progressive training techniques for endurance horses. Her expression made it clear what she thought of Thornton's methods. Your case study would provide a powerful counterpoint. The information was surprising, but not shocking. Thornton had always been skilled at presenting himself as an innovator in the sport, regardless of the actual impact of his methods on the horses in his care. I'll need some time to think about this, Jack said finally, and to discuss it with the others. Eleanor nodded, rising from her chair. Of course. We'll be in town for a few days, meeting with other local trainers and advocates. Perhaps we could return the day after tomorrow for your decision. After the women departed, Jack called an impromptu meeting with Frank and Dr. Wilson, who arrived within the hour. They gathered in the Cooper kitchen where Jack explained Eleanor's proposal. Dr. Wilson was immediately supportive. The Equine Welfare Alliance has been at the forefront of pushing for evidence-based training standards, she said. Their involvement could give Maverick's case the attention it deserves in the right circles. Frank was more cautious. It's a double-edged sword, he warned. Yes, it could help protect Maverick from Thornton's influence, but it also puts a target on all of us. Thornton has powerful friends in the industry who won't appreciate being called out even indirectly. What about Maverick himself? Sarah Cooper interjected, surprising the others with her question. All this attention, all these strangers coming and going, how will it affect his recovery? It was a valid concern that Jack had been considering as well. Maverick's progress was steady but fragile. Disruptions to his routine exposure to unfamiliar people with cameras and equipment. These could potentially trigger setbacks. We'd need to set strict guidelines, Jack decided. Limited access controlled environments, no flash photography, and we maintain the right to stop immediately if Maverick shows signs of distress. That's reasonable, Dr. Wilson agreed. And to be fair, part of his rehabilitation should include gradual exposure to new people and situations. If managed carefully, this could actually be therapeutic. Frank still looked uncertain. Thornton won't take this lying down, he warned. He'll see it as a direct challenge. Maybe it's time someone challenged him, Jack replied, a steely determination in his voice. How many other horses have suffered under his methods? How many will continue to suffer if nothing changes? The question hung in the air, its weight palpable in the kitchen's sudden silence. Well, Frank said finally, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. When you put it that way, guess we don't have much choice, do we? When Eleanor and Jessica returned 2 days later, Jack presented them with his conditions for participation in their campaign. To his relief, they were receptive to his concerns about Maverick's welfare and agreed to a gradual approach that would minimize stress for the recovering horse. We'll start with still photography and existing documentation, Eleanor suggested. Any video filming can wait until Maverick is more accustomed to the process. Over the next few weeks, Maverick's rehabilitation continued alongside the careful documentation of his progress. Jessica visited regularly, her camera capturing milestone moments: Maverick's first time wearing a full saddle, his introduction to the creek for water therapy, his increasingly confident interactions with unfamiliar handlers. Dr. Wilson contributed detailed medical reports and before and after assessments that painted a compelling picture of Maverick's physical recovery. Frank provided invaluable insights into the psychological aspects of rehabilitation, drawing on his decades of experience with traumatized horses. Throughout it all, Jack maintained his focus on Maverick's well-being. Each new step in their training program was taken only when the horse showed readiness, each exposure to outside elements carefully controlled to build confidence rather than trigger fear. By mid-August, nearly 4 months after Jack had brought Maverick home from the auction, they faced their most significant challenge yet. Eleanor had suggested that documenting Maverick's reaction to a training track, a controlled environment, similar to where he had experienced trauma, would powerfully demonstrate both the lasting impact of abuse and the potential for recovery. "We don't need him to run or even wear racing tack," she assured Jack. "Just seeing how he responds to the environment with you beside him offering support would be compelling footage for our presentation." Jack was hesitant. They had made remarkable progress with desensitization in familiar environments, but introducing Maverick to a setting so closely associated with his past suffering was risky. "I won't put him through that unless I'm convinced he's ready," Jack insisted. "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "You know him best. But consider this eventually for his recovery to be complete. Maverick will need to face these triggers in a controlled way. This could be that opportunity." After lengthy discussions with Frank and Dr. Wilson, Jack reluctantly agreed to a trial visit to a small private training track owned by a supporter of the Equine Welfare Alliance. They would bring Maverick to the facility early in the morning when no other horses were present, allow him to become accustomed to the surroundings at his own pace, and leave immediately if he showed signs of serious distress. The day of the track visit dawned clear and cool, ideal conditions for their sensitive mission. Jack had spent the previous evening with Maverick, talking softly to him as if the horse could understand the challenge that lay ahead. "Nothing bad will happen tomorrow," he promised, stroking Maverick's gleaming neck. "I'll be right beside you the whole time." The journey to the training facility was tense. Though Maverick had become comfortable with trailer travel for short distances around the farm, this was his first significant trip since his arrival at the Cooper farm. Jack rode in the trailer with him, a technically unsafe practice that he insisted upon to keep Maverick calm. When they arrived at the deserted training center, Jack led Maverick from the trailer with exquisite care, allowing him to take in his new surroundings gradually. Frank, Dr. Wilson, Eleanor, and Jessica maintained a respectful distance, aware that this moment belonged primarily to the horse and the young man who had committed himself to his recovery. Maverick emerged, blinking in the early morning light, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the track, the distinctive mixture of sand, dirt, and crushed stone that lined the oval course. His ears swiveled rapidly, taking in the unfamiliar sounds, distant traffic birds and the surrounding trees, the gentle flap of flags on the infield poles. For a heart-stopping moment, Jack felt Maverick's muscles tense beneath his hand. The horse's breathing quickened, his eyes widening with the first stirrings of panic. Jack held his breath, prepared to abort the experiment if necessary. But then, remarkably, Maverick turned his head toward Jack, seeking the reassurance of the human who had never betrayed his trust. Jack stroked his neck, murmuring words of encouragement, and gradually the tension eased from the stallion's powerful frame. "That's it," Jack whispered. "I'm right here." Slowly allowing Maverick to set the pace, Jack led him toward the edge of the track. They stopped several yards away, giving the horse time to process the sight and scents. Jessica's camera clicked softly in the background, capturing the moment with professional discretion. After several minutes of quiet observation, Maverick took a tentative step forward, then another, drawing closer to the track surface. Jack matched his movement, neither encouraging nor restraining, simply accompanying. When they reached the edge of the track, Maverick paused again. His ears flicked forward, then back, a sign of internal conflict. Jack waited patiently, respecting the horse's need to process the complex emotions this place evoked. Then, in a moment that none of the observers would ever forget, Maverick reached his muzzle toward the track surface, sniffing curiously at the ground where he had once been driven to collapse. After a thorough investigation, he raised his head and turned to Jack with an almost questioning expression. "It's up to you, buddy," Jack said softly. "Whatever you decide." Maverick stood motionless for another long moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he stepped onto the track surface, his hooves making a soft thudding sound on the carefully maintained footing. Jack moved with him, maintaining the connection between them, as Maverick took first one step, then another onto the ground that had once been associated with pain and fear. They walked slowly along the rail, Maverick's head held at a comfortable height, his ears moving occasionally but no longer pinned back in anxiety. With each step, the stallion seemed to grow more confident, as if reclaiming territory that had been lost to trauma. After completing a quarter of the track's circumference, Jack gently guided Maverick back toward the others who had remained respectfully distant throughout the process. As they approached, Dr. Wilson discreetly wiped a tear from her cheek while Frank stood with arms crossed over his chest, his weathered face creased in a smile of profound satisfaction. "That," Eleanor said quietly, "was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed in 40 years of horse advocacy." Jessica nodded, checking her camera display. "I got everything," she confirmed. "Every moment." The drive back to the Cooper farm was considerably more relaxed than the journey out had been. Maverick traveled calmly occasionally, nickering softly when Jack spoke to him through the trailer partition. As they unloaded back at the farm, Jack was struck by the change in Maverick's demeanor. The horse moved with a new confidence, his head held higher, his steps more assured. It was as if confronting the environment of his past trauma and finding it no longer threatening had released something within him, a final burden he had been carrying. That evening, as the sun set over the Kentucky hills, Jack sat on the paddock fence watching Maverick graze peacefully. Frank joined him, offering a thermos cup of coffee, which Jack accepted gratefully. "Never thought I'd see the day," Frank said, nodding toward Maverick. "Not with how he was when you found him." "He did all the hard work," Jack replied. "I just gave him the chance." Frank shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, son. What you did, what you're doing, it matters. Not just for him, but for all the others that might be saved because of what we're documenting here." Jack considered this. He had begun this journey focused solely on saving one horse with no thought to broader implications. But perhaps that was how real change often started, with a single act of compassion that rippled outward in unexpected ways. "The conference presentation is in 3 weeks, Jack noted. "Think we'll be ready?" Frank smiled, the setting sun casting his weathered face in a golden glow. "Son, after what I saw today, I think you're ready for anything." As if sensing he was the topic of conversation, Maverick lifted his head from grazing and looked toward them, his eyes clear and untroubled in the fading light. He nickered softly, then returned to his evening meal, the picture of equine contentment. In that peaceful moment, watching the horse who had come so far from the broken creature at the auction house, Jack felt a sense of fulfillment deeper than anything he'd experienced in his years of professional training. This wasn't about ribbons or trophies or purse money. This was about restoration, not just of a horse's body and spirit, but of his own faith in the bond between humans and the animals entrusted to their care. The American Endurance Ride Conference convened in Louisville 3 weeks later, drawing participants from across the country. The grand ballroom of the historic Brown Hotel had been transformed for the occasion, with projection screens and professional lighting, creating an atmosphere of serious purpose despite the elegant surroundings. Jack stood backstage, adjusting his tie nervously. He had opted for formal attire, a charcoal suit that had last seen use at his cousin's wedding 3 years ago, at Eleanor's gentle insistence that presentation mattered when addressing this audience. "You look fine," Frank assured him, surprisingly comfortable in his own Western-cut suit. "Stop fiddling with that tie before you strangle yourself." Jack managed a tense smile. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, and the stakes today felt particularly high. In the audience were influential figures from every corner of the endurance racing world: trainers, owners, veterinarians, and rule-making officials. Somewhere among them, though Jack hadn't yet spotted him, was Richard Thornton, scheduled to present his progressive training techniques in the afternoon session. Eleanor appeared elegant in a navy blue dress, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated updo. 10 minutes, she informed them. The introductory remarks are almost finished. Dr. Wilson joined them, completing their presentation team. She had contributed significantly to the medical aspects of their case study, providing irrefutable evidence of Maverick's physical condition upon rescue and his subsequent recovery. "Any sign of Thornton?" Frank asked quietly. Eleanor nodded. "Front row, center section. Impossible to miss. He's the one with the perpetual scowl." Despite his nervousness, Jack felt a surge of determination. They had prepared meticulously for this moment, assembling a presentation that documented every aspect of Maverick's journey, from the terrified, emaciated horse at the auction to the confident, healthy animal he had become. Jessica had compiled their photographs and video footage into a powerful visual narrative, while Dr. Wilson had prepared medical charts and comparative analyses that demonstrated the physical transformation in undeniable terms. Frank had contributed invaluable insights into the psychological rehabilitation process, and Jack had recorded daily logs that tracked Maverick's progress through each milestone. Together, it told a story not just of one horse's recovery, but of the fundamental principles that should guide all equine training: patience, respect, understanding, and above all, recognition of each animal's individual nature and needs. When their names were announced, Jack took a deep breath and followed Eleanor onto the stage. The ballroom was packed, every seat filled with additional spectators standing along the walls. The bright lights made it difficult to see individual faces, but Jack could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. Eleanor began with a brief introduction outlining the Equine Welfare Alliance's mission and the purpose of their presentation. Then she turned the podium over to Jack, whose throat suddenly felt dry as parchment. 4 months ago, he began, his voice initially unsteady but gaining strength with each word, I attended the Westfield auction with no intention of purchasing a horse. I was there to observe, nothing more. But then I saw a chestnut stallion being led into the ring, or rather dragged in. He could barely walk. His body was covered in scars, and his eyes. Jack paused, the memory still vivid. His eyes were empty, as if he'd given up on life entirely. The image of Maverick on that first night appeared on the screen behind him, thin, dull-coated head hanging low. A murmur ran through the audience. That horse had a name once, Jack continued, Resilient Spirit. He had been a promising endurance prospect before being pushed beyond his physical and psychological limits. When he could no longer perform as demanded, he was discarded as worthless. Jack was aware of movement in the front row, Thornton shifting uncomfortably in his seat, but he pressed on, focusing on the story that needed to be told. Today, that same horse has a new name, Maverick, and more importantly, he has a new life. The screen behind him changed to a recent photograph of Rejected Horse Rises Again. Part 3 continued. The screen behind him changed to a recent photograph of Maverick head, held high, coat gleaming in the sunshine, eyes bright with intelligence and trust as he stood beside Jack in the paddock. The transformation was so dramatic that several audience members gasped audibly. This is the same horse 4 months later, Jack continued. This presentation isn't about assigning blame or criticizing specific training methods. It's about demonstrating what's possible when we approach rehabilitation with patience, respect, and evidence-based techniques. For the next 40 minutes, Jack, Dr. Wilson, and Frank took turns presenting different aspects of Maverick's rehabilitation journey. Dr. Wilson detailed the medical challenges they'd faced, from Maverick's severe malnutrition and muscle atrophy to the tendon damage in his left foreleg that had initially seemed beyond repair. The physical injuries were significant, she explained, gesturing to detailed veterinary charts, but ultimately treatable with proper nutrition, controlled exercise, and time. The psychological trauma, however, presented the greater challenge. Frank stepped forward, then his decades of experience lending weight to his words as he described the painstaking process of rebuilding Maverick's trust. Horses don't forget, he told the audience. They carry their experiences, good and bad, in every fiber of their being. Our task wasn't to erase Maverick's past, but to help him move beyond it. The presentation continued with video footage of key moments in Maverick's recovery. His first tentative steps into the paddock, his gradually increasing confidence with handling, and most powerfully, his recent visit to the training track, where he had walked calmly alongside Jack on the very type of surface that had once been associated with his worst experiences. Throughout it all, Jack was acutely aware of Thornton's presence in the front row. The man sat rigid in his chair, his expression a carefully maintained mask of professional interest that failed to hide the anger in his eyes. As they neared the conclusion of their presentation, Eleanor rejoined them on stage. The Equine Welfare Alliance believes that Maverick's case, while remarkable, is not unique, she stated. Many horses in competitive disciplines face similar challenges when the pursuit of victory overshadows their well-being. What is unique here is the documented journey from trauma to recovery, a journey that offers valuable lessons for our entire community. She turned to Jack, inviting him to deliver the closing remarks they had carefully prepared. Maverick's story isn't just about rehabilitation, Jack said, his voice strong with conviction. It's about responsibility. As trainers, owners, and caretakers, we hold these animals' lives in our hands. They can't speak for themselves. They can't quit when conditions become abusive. They can only endure until they can't. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. Endurance racing is a magnificent sport with a proud tradition. But that tradition is undermined when we prioritize results over welfare, when we push horses beyond their physical and psychological limits in pursuit of trophies and prize money. On the screen behind him appeared a final image, Maverick running freely in the Cooper Farm's largest pasture, his movement fluid and joyful, the very picture of equine health and happiness. This is what success looks like, Jack concluded. Not a ribbon or a trophy, but a horse who has rediscovered his spirit, who moves without pain and lives without fear. That should be the true measure of our achievement as horsemen and women. The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, applause echoing through the ballroom. Jack glanced at Frank and Dr. Wilson, sharing a moment of stunned gratification before Eleanor ushered them toward the side of the stage for the Quanda portion of their session. As the applause subsided and audience members began approaching the microphones stationed in the aisles, Jack noticed Thornton rising from his seat and striding toward the exit, his presentation materials clutched tightly under his arm. Something in the man's rigid posture and furious expression sent a chill of apprehension through Jack. The first several questions were directed primarily to Dr. Wilson, focusing on the medical aspects of Maverick's rehabilitation. She answered with professional precision, emphasizing the importance of collaborative care between trainers and veterinarians. Then a distinguished-looking woman in riding attire approached the center microphone. "My question is for Mr. Cooper," she said. "I'm Victoria Langford, chair of the Competition Standards Committee. Your presentation was compelling, but I'm curious, what specific rule changes would you propose to prevent similar cases in the future?" Jack hadn't anticipated policy questions, but he answered honestly. "I believe mandatory rest periods between competitions would be a start. Independent veterinary assessments at checkpoints with the authority to withdraw horses showing signs of distress regardless of trainer objections. And perhaps most importantly, transparency in reporting injuries and breakdowns so patterns can be identified." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Those are reasonable suggestions that align with reforms our committee has been considering. Would you be willing to consult with us on implementing such changes?" The invitation caught Jack by surprise. "I'd be honored," he replied, aware that he was being drawn into a more public role than he had initially intended. As the Quanda continued, Frank leaned close to Jack's ear. "Thornton left in a hurry," he murmured. "That doesn't sit right with me." Jack nodded slightly, sharing Frank's concern. Thornton had been scheduled to present later that afternoon. His abrupt departure suggested he might have other plans. When the session finally concluded, Eleanor guided them through a crush of attendees eager to discuss the presentation further. Jack appreciated the positive response, but couldn't shake his unease about Thornton's departure. "I think I should head back to the farm," he told Eleanor as they made their way to the conference center's lobby. "Check on Maverick." Eleanor looked disappointed but understanding. "Of course. We can handle the networking reception without you. Will you return for tomorrow's sessions?" "I'll try," Jack promised, though his priority was clear. The drive from Louisville back to the Cooper farm took just over an hour, during which Jack's apprehension grew. He tried calling home several times, but reception was spotty on the rural roads, and his calls went unanswered. As he turned onto the gravel driveway leading to the farm, Jack's heart sank. A Millerville County Sheriff's Department cruiser was parked in front of the house alongside Thornton's black Cadillac. Jack parked hastily and sprinted toward the barn where he could see a small gathering of people, his parents Emma and two uniformed deputies standing with Thornton, who was gesturing emphatically toward Maverick's paddock. "What's going on?" Jack demanded as he approached. Robert Cooper turned to his son with evident relief. "Jack, thank goodness. This man," he indicated Thornton with obvious distaste, "is claiming we're keeping his horse illegally." One of the deputies, a middle-aged man with a patient expression, stepped forward. "Mr. Cooper, I'm Deputy Williams. We're responding to a complaint filed by Mr. Thornton here, who claims ownership of a horse on your property." "That's absurd," Jack replied, fighting to keep his voice level. "I purchased Maverick legally at the Westfield auction 4 months ago. I have the bill of sale and registration transfer." Thornton's face was flushed with either anger or triumph, perhaps both. "The horse was consigned to auction by an unauthorized stable hand," he claimed. "I never intended to sell Resilient Spirit. He's a valuable breeding prospect, and I have the original registration papers to prove my ownership." Jack stared at him in disbelief. It was a blatant lie, but a clever one, creating just enough legal ambiguity to cause trouble. Deputy Sarah Cooper interjected, "My son has poured his heart and soul into rehabilitating that horse from a terrible condition. He has documentation of the purchase and all subsequent veterinary care." Deputy Williams nodded, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we understand this is a sensitive situation. We're not here to remove the horse today. This appears to be a civil matter that will need to be resolved through proper legal channels." His partner, a younger woman, added, "We're just documenting the complaint and advising all parties to maintain the status quo until ownership can be legally determined." Jack's relief at hearing they wouldn't take Maverick was tempered by fury at Thornton's underhanded tactics. "This is harassment," he said flatly. "Mr. Thornton is retaliating because we presented evidence of his abusive training methods at the conference today." Thornton's expression hardened. "Defamation is a serious charge, Cooper. You might want to be careful what you allege." "Gentlemen," Deputy Williams intervened, "I suggest you both consult with legal counsel before making any further statements. As I said, this appears to be a civil matter. We've documented the complaint and the current location of the horse in question." After the deputies departed, promising to file their report with the appropriate authorities. Thornton lingered, his calculating gaze fixed on Maverick, who watched the proceedings from the safety of his paddock. "You think you've won some kind of moral victory today?" he said to Jack, voice low and venomous. "But this isn't over. That horse represents a significant investment, and I protect my investments." "He's not a thing," Jack replied, struggling to contain his anger. "He's a living being that you nearly destroyed, and there's no way in hell I'm letting him go back to you." Thornton smiled thinly. "We'll see what the courts have to say about that. Sentimental arguments don't hold much weight when property rights are at stake." He turned toward his car, then paused. "By the way, your little presentation today, it's already being forgotten. The racing community respects results, not bleeding heart rehabilitation stories." After Thornton's departure, the Cooper family gathered in the kitchen to assess their situation. Emma, whose law school training proved invaluable, outlined their legal position. "The good news is you have solid documentation of the purchase," she told Jack. "The bill of sale, transfer of registration, even witnesses from the auction. The bad news is litigation can be lengthy and expensive, even when you're in the right." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, pouring coffee for everyone. "We fight," Jack said simply. "Whatever it takes." Robert nodded, placing a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. "And we call Eleanor. The Equine Welfare Alliance must have legal resources they can bring to bear on a case like this." Jack's phone rang. Frank, calling from Louisville after hearing about the confrontation through Emma's urgent text messages. "I'm leaving the conference now," Frank said, his voice tight with concern. "Should be there in an hour. Don't let Thornton anywhere near Maverick if he comes back." "We won't," Jack assured him. "But I think he's playing a longer game. Legal harassment, dragging this out until we can't afford to fight anymore." "Then we'll need to change the game," Frank replied cryptically before hanging up. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Eleanor mobilized the Equine Welfare Alliance's legal team, who quickly filed counter-complaints against Thornton for false claims and harassment. The local media, alerted to the controversy, began publishing articles about Maverick's remarkable rehabilitation and the subsequent ownership dispute. Public opinion swung decisively in Jack's favor when Jessica released additional footage from their documentation project, particularly powerful clips showing Maverick's transformation from the broken creature at the auction to the healthy, trusting horse he had become. A week after Thornton's visit to the farm, Jack received an unexpected call from Victoria Langford of the Competition Standards Committee. "Mr. Cooper," she began without preamble, "I've been following the situation with your horse. The committee is deeply concerned about Mr. Thornton's claims, especially in light of the evidence presented at the conference." "Thank you for your concern," Jack replied, uncertain where this was heading. "This isn't just a courtesy call," Victoria continued. "The committee has voted to open an official investigation into Mr. Thornton's training practices based on the medical evidence Dr. Wilson presented. Furthermore, we're implementing several of the rule changes you suggested on an expedited basis." Jack was momentarily speechless. He had hoped their presentation might influence future policies, but hadn't expected such immediate action. "That's remarkable," he managed finally. "There's more," Victoria said. "The investigation means Mr. Thornton's competition license is suspended pending the outcome. He's effectively barred from all sanctioned events for the foreseeable future." She paused. "I thought you should know that his financial backers are withdrawing support in droves. No sponsors want to be associated with these allegations." After the call ended, Jack sat on the porch steps processing the implications. Thornton's power had always stemmed from his success and connections in the racing world. With his reputation damaged and financial support evaporating, his ability to pursue a prolonged legal battle over Maverick would be severely compromised. Frank found him there, offering a steaming mug of coffee as he settled beside Jack on the steps. "Heard about Thornton's suspension," the older man said. "Word travels fast in racing circles." Jack nodded. "Victoria Langford just called to tell me. Seems like our presentation had more impact than we realized." Frank smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with satisfaction. "Justice comes in unexpected form sometimes." He gestured toward the paddock where Maverick grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "How's our boy doing with all this commotion?" "Surprisingly well," Jack replied. "It's like he knows we're fighting for him." They sat in companionable silence, watching Maverick move with the fluid grace that had been restored through months of patient rehabilitation. "You know," Frank said finally, "when I first saw that horse at River Bend, I recognized something special in him. Not just athletic talent, but heart, the kind you can't train into them. It's born there or it isn't." He glanced at Jack. "Same thing I saw in you that day you showed up asking questions about him." Jack smiled, touched by the unexpected compliment. "High praise coming from you." "Just the truth," Frank replied with a shrug. "Some people are meant to find each other. You and Maverick, that's one of those pairings that makes an old horseman believe in something bigger than chance." 3 days later, Jack's phone rang while he was working with Maverick in the round pen. The caller ID showed Eleanor's number. "Jack," she said when he answered, her voice vibrating with suppressed excitement, "I've just heard from our legal team. Thornton is withdrawing his ownership claim." Jack nearly dropped the phone. "What? Why?" "The official reason is that pursuing the matter isn't worth his time and resources," Eleanor replied. "But unofficially, I think the combination of public pressure, financial losses, and the pending investigation made his position untenable." "So it's over?" Jack asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Not entirely," Eleanor cautioned. "We're insisting on formal documentation renouncing any future claims on Maverick. But yes, the immediate threat is past." After hanging up, Jack leaned against the round pen fence, overwhelmed with relief. Maverick approached, nudging his shoulder gently as if sensing his emotions. "You're safe now, boy," Jack told him, stroking the white star on his forehead. "Really and truly safe." The weeks that followed brought a return to normalcy at the Cooper farm. Maverick's rehabilitation continued, each day bringing new progress as the horse reclaimed not just his physical abilities, but his natural joy and curiosity. Word of his remarkable recovery spread throughout the equestrian community, drawing occasional visitors, trainers, veterinarians, and welfare advocates eager to learn from their success. Jack welcomed them, recognizing that Maverick's story could help change practices and save other horses from similar suffering. On a crisp autumn morning, with leaves turning golden on the surrounding hills, Dr. Wilson conducted what had become a routine examination of Maverick in the paddock. "Well," she said, straightening from checking his once damaged leg, "I think it's official. He's fully recovered, physically speaking." Jack smiled, watching Maverick investigate Dr. Wilson's medical bag with typical curiosity. "And psychologically, I'm not sure horses ever completely forget trauma," she replied thoughtfully. "But they can move beyond it, learn to trust again, find joy in their lives." She gestured toward Maverick, who was now playfully tossing her stethoscope into the air. "I'd say he's done exactly that. So what next?" Jack asked. "For his future, I mean." Dr. Wilson considered the question. "That's up to you, isn't it? He's young, healthy, and intelligent. He could have many paths ahead of him." It was a question Jack had been contemplating for some time. Maverick's days as an endurance racer were rightfully over. His body had paid too high a price already for that particular career, but he was too vibrant, too capable to simply live out his days as a pasture ornament. The answer came a week later when Eleanor called with an unexpected proposal. "The Alliance is establishing a new program," she explained, "an educational initiative focused on ethical training methods and equine welfare. We need a flagship horse one with a compelling story that demonstrates both the cost of abusive practices and the potential for rehabilitation." "You want Maverick," Jack guessed. "We want both of you," Eleanor clarified. "Your partnership is what makes the story powerful. Trainers relate to you, Jack. You're not some distant academic or activist. You're one of them, showing a better way forward." The proposal was intriguing. It would involve travel to equine education events and demonstrations, sharing Maverick's story and the techniques that had facilitated his recovery. It wasn't a path Jack had ever envisioned for himself, but he couldn't deny the potential impact. "I'll need to think about it," he told Eleanor. "Discuss it with my family and Frank." That evening, gathered around the Cooper kitchen table, Jack presented the proposal to his parents, Emma and Frank. Their support was unanimous and immediate. "You'd be making a real difference," Emma pointed out, "changing the industry from within." "The farm will manage fine with you traveling occasionally," Robert added. "Your mother and I aren't ready for retirement just yet." Frank, who had become like family over the months of working with Maverick, nodded his agreement. "It's a natural next step. That horse has more to teach us all, and you're the right person to help him do it." The following weekend, Jack took Maverick for a long ride through the autumn woods surrounding the Cooper farm. It was their first true recreational ride together. Not rehabilitation, not training, just the simple pleasure of horse and rider moving in harmony through the dappled sunlight. As they paused on a hilltop overlooking the valley, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate auction house rescue to a partnership that had changed both their lives immeasurably. "What do you think, Maverick?" he asked, patting the horse's gleaming neck. "Ready for a new adventure?" Maverick tossed his head and nickered softly as if in agreement. Jack smiled, feeling a deep certainty that whatever path lay ahead, they would walk it together, two resilient spirits who had found in each other the healing they both needed. 6 months later, Jack stood in the wings of an auditorium at a major equestrian expo, watching as Eleanor introduced him to a packed audience of trainers, owners, and enthusiasts. Beside him, Maverick waited, calmly accustomed now to crowds and presentations after a successful tour of educational events across the country. "Ready, partner?" Jack murmured, adjusting the simple halter that was the only equipment Maverick needed these days. The stallion nickered softly, nudging Jack's shoulder in what had become their private sign of trust and affection. Together, they walked into the spotlight, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals on a shared mission. The audience applauded, many already familiar with their story through the media coverage and the Alliance's educational materials. As Jack began to speak, sharing the journey that had brought them to this moment, He glanced at Maverick standing proudly beside him. The once broken horse now embodied everything Jack believed about the power of patience, compassion, and second chances. "This isn't just Maverick's story," Jack told the audience, his voice strong with conviction. "It's the story of what's possible when we choose respect over dominance, partnership over exploitation. It's a reminder that sometimes the most damaged spirits have the most to teach us if only we have the courage to listen." Maverick turned his head, meeting Jack's gaze with the clear, confident eyes of a horse who had reclaimed his spirit and found his purpose. In that moment, Jack knew with absolute certainty that their journey together was just beginning. The end.